So, Oscar, I sent you the view of one of our viewers on a previous short that I published that was called The Struggle Was Derailed. And his opinion, standing course, he said, and I'm going to try and summarize it for you because I'm keen to hear your opinion. He said there were two events he believes that derailed the struggle: Codesa misnegotiations and the opening up of our borders. Sounds a little bit xenophobic, but I don't know, maybe not. Those are the two critical events that changed the course of South Africa's non-future. Assess the damage flowing from these two, and everyone will understand why we are where we are, not as a nation, a country, a non-sovereign state. So I'm keen to know whether you agree with him, his sentiments, but also for us to move on to what the key moments, in your opinion, is that really changed the trajectory of South Africa. But let's address Stanley's opinion first.
Yeah, thanks, Lynette. Firstly, I disagree with Stan completely. I don't think that those are two significant events that derailed our democracy. I think there's many other things that we can refer to. I mean, firstly, we have to look at this, from the vantage point of ideologically. So I think that's the first thing that people will say. Where are we ideologically? Are we on the right trajectory in terms of ideologically? The second one is a more practical question about events that have transpired in the political sphere that have had repercussions on where we are today. Now, in terms of an ideological perspective, there are two schools of thought, as always. The one is that the one argument is that the ANC did not have to negotiate the outcome that it negotiated in the early 1990s. Too many compromises were made. We left the structure of the economy squarely within white hands. At the behest and at the cost of Black South Africans, and as a result, we still reap the negatives of that compromise negotiated settlement. So that's one of the schools. The second school says we had very little to negotiate with, in the sense that we needed to make sure that the first objective is attained, which is the universal suffrage of all South Africans, especially Blacks, that they were able to gain back their political freedom. And in a way, it was saying that once we have the levers of power, once we are in the corridors of power, we will address the second component, which is the socio-economic emancipation of our people. And so that is a school that's the second school from an ideological point of view. The audience is still out as to which school has seen the light of day. But if we take that argument and we bring it to today, and I'll come to some of the significant events, if we bring that to today, a steady decline in ANC support over the last few general elections, and then a massive tipping point in this last elections of a few days ago, where the ANC dips significantly below 50%. A very clear message from the electorate. Massive apathy, as you know, Lynette, of the 31 million registered voters, 27 million actually came to register. 31 eligible voters, 27 million registered to vote. Only 16 million of those actually voted. And of that 16 million, 6 million voted for the African National Congress, the governing party. That is in stark contrast to the last elections of 2019, where there was more or less the same voter turnout, 17 million. Of that, 10 million voted for the ANC. Now, if we just give a breakdown, I just want to make people understand. 6 million voted for the ANC. Roughly 2.5 million voted for MK. the new Jacob Zuma party.
Mm.
And if you look at KwaZulu-Natal, where more than 95% of the support base of the MK party is, then you will find that in 2019, 3.5 million people voted in KwaZulu-Natal. And of that 3.5 million, 2 million voted for the ANC. And so you can see that the overwhelming majority of those 2 million in this election voted for MK, abandoned the ANC. And so the argument, if you now come back to the two schools of thought, ideologically, the argument by many is that because the ANC entered into a flactuous negotiated settlement, was not strong enough to make sure that we equalize the economic situation of Black South Africans. That is why we now have this revolt, this anti-ANC sentiment permeating through the election. So that's an important point to make.
Sorry to interrupt you for a second, just for a second.
Yeah.
For background for listeners and viewers that don't really understand the dynamics of South African politics, we need to say though that MK, Umkhonto we Sizwe, and EFF, they were literally cut from the same cloth. And the fact that there has been a revolt over a few years, and where we find ourselves now, they still, from that group, remain the top 4 political parties in the country, as seen as from this past election.
No, absolutely. And I was going to come to that, Lynette, as one of these big events that we're talking about. So to conclude, so we see that backlash that then happens. Then the second thing is that I think what is important to say is that the second school that argued that we had very little to maneuver with, and that we were going to address socioeconomics over time. That school of thought will argue that the environment, both domestically and internationally, has been very, very difficult over the last 30 years. As you know, we don't operate in isolation. We are governed by what happens externally beyond our borders. And the situation, the truth of the matter is that as we were coming in out of the 1990s and into the 2000s, we experienced a significant commodity boom, which was good for the economy. It was under the Thabo Mbeki years, and we reaped the benefits of that. The economy grew at about average 4%, and so on and so forth. Immediately after his removal, and not because of it, the world experienced a global financial meltdown in 2008, 2009. We didn't feel the shocks of that so much because we were in the euphoria of 2010, the Soccer World Cup, and so on, and indeed had a successful Soccer World Cup, one of the pluses under the Jacob Zuma administration. But soon after that, we started feeling the negative impact and the shocks of that financial crisis. And then we go into this period of state capture. And so I want to say that one of the key events, two things I want to mention, is one, it is indeed external exogenous factors, which we have no control over. And far too often, Lynette, people try and downplay that. But when you are a middle range economy such as ourselves, we can sometimes very negatively get affected by international events and shocks and so forth. So that's the first thing. The second thing is policy choices that was made by the ANC around how we stabilize the economy, how we're going to try and address and redress the vestiges of the past of apartheid. Policies of broad-based economic empowerment, policies of affirmative action, and so on and so forth. It hasn't gone down well with the private sector, and it has been experiencing significant problems. Then, coupled with that, is this, and this is the next big event that I think contributed to our derailment, if we have to use Stan's metaphor, and that is the consistent breakaways that have happened in the ANC over this 30 years. Starting right at the beginning with the UDM. People forget that Holomisa was once part and on the inside of the tent, and then he got thrown out and formed the UDM. Then after that came a massive fissure post-2007, and that was the formation of COPE, Congress of the People, and the Terra Lakota and others. And then we had a situation where we then had subsequently the EFF, and then finally this latest MK iteration. And I think that is important in terms of events that have chipped away at our fibers as an organization in the ANC, but also as a society. I do, however, want to say that there is one other key issue, if you like, Lynette, elephant in the room, and that is the national question, what people refer to as the national question. And that is the politics of race. You know, it's too convenient.
That is a discussion that needs to be needs to be had.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I was just going to say, far too often, both from black and white, there is the retort, must we always talk about race? But the truth of the matter is that this has defined our body politic for the last 400 years. I mean, this is just a fact. You know, from settler colonialism all the way into legalized apartheid and so forth, and has been with us for that long. And so in terms of our mindset, me and you and others will be very convinced that we are not racist, that we embrace non-racialism, and that we want a rainbow nation to go forward. And this is probably true. That is our desire. But our sinew, our DNA is such that deep down, we all still have very much racist undertones within our makeup.
Throwback to the scars of apartheid because of the conditioning.
Absolutely.
That we all South Africans experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, you might have fared fairly well over the last 30 years because of your levels of education and some luck and a few opportunities that was thrown your way, and good for you, you know. But the truth of the matter is that when you come home at night and you're waiting for your gate to open and two black gentlemen are coming down the road, you immediately kick in and think that these could be potential criminals. They could potentially want to rob me and so on and so forth. I'm not wanting to go into too many examples. The point I'm making is that we have not efficiently and sufficiently addressed this issue of race. And so when you look at the voting patterns, it is still very much on the lines of identity politics and race.
Yes.
The reason why MK and the Patriotic Alliance have been the two parties that were so successful in this election is because they were campaigning based on race and tribal and very narrow nationalistic politics. And the Zulus fell for it, or the large parts of the Zulus in KwaZulu-Natal, and the Coloureds, the so-called Coloureds, fell for it with Gayton McKenzie and the likes, because at the end of the day, Gayton's message is very clear and unambiguous. So-called Coloureds were not black enough, not white enough during apartheid, and now they are not black enough during a democratic South Africa.
So let me take you back to Stanley's comment, because this is one of the aspects that he touched on, the fact that we opened our borders and that the influx of trouble that came to South Africa could have been controlled better. Maybe that creates the narrative for the flourishing of these parties that you just mentioned, MK and the Patriotic Alliance. I quickly want to touch on something you said earlier. When we talk about the key moments that defined or influenced South Africa's democracy, you reference the two schools of thought, but it sounds to me that South Africa's democracy and evolution is so closely linked to what happened these past 30 years within a political party, the African National Congress.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's a fact, you know. But just to come back very quickly to one of the points you made, you know, I don't think that this issue of illegal immigrants finds traction with the majority of South Africans, and I'll tell you why. Because you'll recall the Net Action essay, Herman Mashaba also made a big thing about these illegal immigrants, and we must get rid of them, and they are here to take our jobs, and so on and so forth. His party is no more as we speak. And so for a brief moment, the Patriotic Alliance might be riding this wave of foreign nationals and so forth. I don't think it is going to find traction. However, having said that, I also want to make clear, Lynette, that I don't think it is a contributing factor to where we find ourselves today, but it is certainly a factor that needs to be addressed. It is a factor that needs to be addressed. There are wholly too many illegal immigrants from neighboring countries in Africa and further afield on the continent in South Africa. And this is a challenge. No one can deny this. It's not even about being xenophobic. The truth of the matter is, there are very real statistics that show us in terms of employment stats within the hospitality industry throughout the country, from Cape Town to Thohoyandou, white-owned businesses in the main, not exclusively, but in the main, employ foreign nationals. They are the waiters, they are the ones who are the Uber drivers, they are the ones who are delivery persons, whether it's Uber Eats or Checker 60, etc., etc. And the question we must ask is, why is that? Are these indeed jobs that cannot be done by local South Africans? And they use excuses. Around, for example, not a good command of English, not the requisite levels of education, etc. I'm not sure what level of education you need to be able to bring a plate of food from the kitchen to this table in a respectful manner. But we can debate the pros and cons of that. There are some merit. There's some merit in having a conversation, of course.
So when we look at South Africa's growth and where we found ourselves 30 years later, are there certain eras that you can pinpoint where South Africa flourished and where we were dipping and where we consolidated to where we find ourselves? Because we were very optimistic and enthusiastic about building South Africa, building a nation, unifying with Nelson Mandela and what we meant and how we portrayed ourselves to the world. And now we find ourselves with a party that has, as you said earlier, under 50% of the support of South Africans. So take me through the ebb and flow of South Africa's democracy in your view, if we talk about the key moments that shaped South Africa's democracy the past 30 years.
Sure. Let's start from the beginning. I'm not wanting to be too long. There was a historical injustice that occurred on the shores of the Republic of South Africa, Mzansi. And we can go as far back as in the 1500s. You know, people think our history, according to the Europeans, started in 1652. We know that not to be the truth. We know that we have been fighting battles with European settlers as far back as 1510, and probably further afield. The Battle of Salt River against the Portuguese, for example, and the Spanish, Alma Mater, and so on and so forth. But there was this historical injustice. For the viewers, if they are interested in history, a very good speech to read, if you want to conceptually understand the historical injustice, is a speech that was delivered by former President Thabo Mbeki when he was invited to the Canadian Parliament in 1976. to give them a sense of what is the problematique of South Africa. What is the problem? And he then delivered a very, very decisive Marxist analysis document about the historical injustice and the underpinnings of that. The ANC was formed in 1912 as a direct response to the formation of the Union of South Africa in 1910, at the exclusion of the black majority. So at the point where the British hands over power to the locals, it is handed only to whites. The ANC tries to make representation at the time Native Congress to the Queen. They are not met with any joy. They then form an alternative black parliament called the African National Congress. Fast forward, battles, anti-apartheid struggles, etc. You fast forward to the breakthrough of 1990. Now, this is one of the key moments where the apartheid government, where the settler colonial and apartheid project comes to an end. 1990, February. And if anyone needs any clarification, this is not done out of the good graces and goodwill of F.W. de Klerk, not at all. It is the persistent struggles of the black majority South Africans, both domestically in the country as well as abroad in exile. They've managed to galvanize a whole anti-apartheid movement against the apartheid government. And so 1990 is significant. The next significant step is 1994, where Black South Africans actually now are liberated and receive the universal suffrage. They can vote for the government of their choice. Of course, I don't make small what happened between 1990 and 1994. Those 4 years have been tumultuous years. People refer to 1994 as the miracle.
Yes.
Well, that miracle came about through the massive suffering and killing of many, many South Africans at the murderous hands of not only the apartheid government, but also the IFP. And I think we mustn't forget that history. And so 1994 is that critical moment. We go to the polls, we elect Nelson Mandela as the father of our democracy into power. The next big step post-1994 is indeed a period of rebuilding and a period of consolidation. So under Nelson Mandela and Thabo Mbeki, that rebuilding and consolidation happens. The next key moment that happens is in 2007 at the Polokwane conference of the ANC, when they elect Jacob Zuma as the president of the ANC. And why is this a key moment? Because for the first time ever, tribalism is introduced into the organization. You go to that conference and you find people with T-shirts that say 100% Zulu. I was at that conference, Lynette, where in the opening ceremony, you have a Zulu man coming into the hall in full Zulu regalia with a spear and shield, dancing and making all kinds of Zulu gestures and so forth, going all the way up to the front of the podium, in order to earmark that the Zulus have arrived. This is significant because the ANC for decades have been fighting against tribalism, because we've seen the ill effects of backward politics like tribalism and its effects on the continent in particular. You look at Rwanda, the examples, the Zimbabwe and Matabele land, and many, many other examples. And we've been anti that phenomenon up until that point of 2007. The ANC would want to deny this. But the truth is, that's when tribalism crept into the organization and was allowed to creep into the organization.
Mm-hmm.
The next key event that then happens is state capture. Zuma started out fairly okay. He was shining and basking in the sun of the Mbeki era, a successful World Cup, which was planned way before he took office, but he took the claim for that.
Yeah, 2010.
He took the claim of joining BRICS, when in fact we know that Mbeki's administration laid the foundation for that through the IPSA gathering, the India, Brazil, South Africa. But he took the glory for that. And soon after that, because he had nothing else to offer, he reverted back to his default position, which was to loot and to empower and to ingratiate and to allow the country to slip into the worst period in our history over the last 30 years. And that is 9 wasted years of state capture. And, Lynette, it's too convenient to want to put the blame at the doorstep of one Indian family called the Guptas. They were a mere vessel. They saw the opportunity, and many others, both public and private. I think it's very important to make this point. This was not just a looting by public servants, by public representatives. We look at the State Capture Commission, we go through that report, and you see the complicitness of the private sector, KPMG, Bain Accounting, PricewaterhouseCoopers. You look at various banks that facilitated the free flow of the finances and so forth, knowing very well that they are participating in grand theft, and many others. It's, so this notion that the 9 wasted years was only government driven is a falseness, and it will be a black spot on our history for a long time still to come.
So fast forward to 2020.
So we come out of that period of state capture, and then there's a significant period, and I'll tell you why I mention it, and that is the period of renewal in the ANC. Cyril Ramaphosa now needs to renew the ANC, needs to get rid of these bad apples, needs to cleanse the ANC, because we can see the downward trajectory of the ANC over the last couple of years at each election. And so there's pushback on that. There's pushback for that cleanup. And before I come to the final point, which is the outcome of this election, I want to just contextualize this cleanup. You have a situation, Lynette, where in 2017, because they can see that there is this push to clean up the ANC, Zuma's term is coming to an end. They've been enjoying being at the trough, indiscriminately feeding. It's a feeding frenzy, in fact. They want to continue. And so Zuma puts forward his ex-wife, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, to be the next president of the ANC. Nothing wrong with the individual, a good comrade, a good cadre. She has never given us any indication of wrongdoing, except, according to me, a miscalculation right at the beginning of our democratic era with the Sarafina saga. But I don't think she was corrupt necessarily. And so there was nothing wrong with the individual, but the team around her was more of the same. It was the Ace Makashulis. It was the Mabuza, David Mabuza, et cetera, et cetera. It was the radical economic transformation types, which we know were the architects of state capture. And so that could not continue. And so KwaZulu-Natal comes to that conference in 2017, Nasrec 1, with a clear mandate that they want a continuation of a Zulu presidency. they get defeated very narrowly, as you know.
Mm.
Cyril wins with 79 votes. And I talk about this in my second book, 2 Minutes to Midnight, Will Ramaphosa's ANC Survive? Fast forward to the next elective conference of 2022, 2 years ago. KwaZulu-Natal comes back with a vengeance. Larger numbers. This time, they want to again pursue and make the presidency of the ANC led by a Zulu, and this is Mkhize. They get defeated again by conference, this time with a larger margin, much more comfortable margin, which puts Ramaphosa squarely in the driving seat. Remember, all along, they talk of Ramaphosa as a representative of white monopoly capital.
Yes.
He is a stooge for white capital. He is not interested in transformation. He's not interested in wanting to redress the ills of apartheid and empower the majority of our people. Of course, that is a debatable point, because one would argue that the ANC has consistently, as an organization, been wanting to redress the ills of the past, hence the social welfare systems, hence the various programs and policies. But be that as it may, I'm just trying to give you a sketch. KwaZulu-Natal leaves that conference at the end of December 2022, utterly frustrated, regardless of their huge numbers. And I'm talking here, if you look at a conference of 5,000 delegates, 1,800 is from KwaZulu-Natal. It's massive. If they just get the support of one other medium-sized province, they take the conference, and yet they get defeated twice. So they were defeated twice. And by the time the buses are leaving Nazareth 2, at the end of December 2022, cadres from KwaZulu-Natal are angry, they are upset. Their numbers are not working in the ANC. They are unable in their minds to defeat this white monopoly capital
that they associate Cyril Ramaphosa with.
Exactly. And so a different plan needs to be executed. And so when people say MK party started 5 months ago and look at their miraculous support and their gains, this is a false statement. The idea of MK, I'm fairly certain, started soon after the ANC conference of 2022, where they decided that they can no longer influence and have hegemony within the African National Congress, and therefore they need to create an alternative to challenge the ANC. And that is where MK comes about. An idea that was fomented by the former President Jacob Zuma and those that were disgruntled with the direction the ANC was taking, in particular, its renewal project. It's very important to make this point. The renewal project is what brought MK about. So when people, and I'm jumping now, Lynette, when people talk of we must talk to MK for a coalition, this will be a disaster, because all you then do is invite the rotten apples back into the ANC. This is going to be a big mistake, but I'll come to that a bit later. So to conclude on the big events is now this recent election of a few days ago, where the electorate punishes the ANC and it gets below 50%, a very significant turn of events in the history of the country. The people are saying that their confidence in the ANC is seriously waning. It's not yet completely diminished, but it is seriously waning. And if it continues on this current trajectory, it will certainly become a party in its 30%, just like any other party. And so new changes are going to have to be made. But I want to make one point to conclude this historical narrative that I've given, and that is that the outcome of this election is a big win for democracy. I want to reiterate that, not because I support 40% for the ANC, but it is a maturing of our democracy, because anyone that listens to this podcast will agree that at some point we were going to find ourselves here, where our democracy is now normalizing, that we need to compete as equal partners on the landscape, of the political landscape. It has been quite significant and impressive that the ANC was able to maintain its one-party dominance. But we've now entered the realm of realpolitik, and it's about now having to satisfy the electorate. And if you can't satisfy them, they will continue to punish you. And so we will see for the upcoming local government election in 2026 and the general election in 2029 as to whether the ANC is going to succeed in winning back the trust of the people.